Hello, I'm Maxine,
I'm Julie.
and we are Celebrants, and we are both trainers at the International College of Professional Celebrants. And we're here today to talk about why ceremonies are important. So, we have evidence that over 130,000 years ago, there was evidence of a burial, I think, wasn't it,
It
Julie?
was a burial with a child, I think, and the bones had been put in with tools and with other things that were related to him. And I think what fascinates anthropologists is that it was 130,000 years ago. They were then trying to make sense of the world, what
Mm.
happens when we die, and also preparing for what happens when we die. They obviously had considered an afterlife and why we're here, those big questions. That's a long time ago.
It is, and it's fascinating to see that's continued. We have all different types of ceremonies in every culture, and although we all celebrate and grieve differently, that ceremony is a really important part of marking rites of passage throughout people's lives, isn't it? And
Yeah,
and and so, what's your view on why is it important? What does that do for people?
it's a good question. And I think working as a celebrant, practicing ceremonies with people, you can see it quite clearly that people go from one state of being to a different state of being. And the ceremony is what links them, the
Mm.
ritual of the ceremony. So the obvious one is obviously with a funeral, where you have had the shock of the death. Even if it's expected, you still have that moment of not being yourself, having that out of body experience. And what you're aiming to do is to find some sort of acceptance and an ability to move forward with your own life. And at the funeral is the ceremony that helps that process. It's if you've experienced your parents dying, haven't you? You had
Yes, absolutely.
what did you experience that as a changed state in yourself?
I did. I think it's a moment in time where you get the opportunity to reflect and think. And I found my coping mechanism is to do and to organise. So if there's a crisis, I'm in there and I'm up to my elbows in it because I don't sit and reflect and other people will be crying immediately and I'm thinking, oh, I don't feel
What's
that.
wrong with me? Yeah.
I can't do that. I get on and do. But I found when with my mum's funeral, when I actually got there, and I didn't cry when the coffin arrived, and we cry on the journey, nothing at all. Where everybody around me was in floods of tears. When I finally looked out of the limousine and saw my family and my friends and my mum's friends, that was the moment at which I recognised my love and everybody else's love for my mum, and that was at the point where I think my shock and grief started, if you want. But then you get the comfort of being surrounded by those people, so that going, as you said, going through that transitional period when you go and have your food and you share experiences afterwards, there's still the sadness in the room, but there's also the sharing of the joy and the memories and the love. So, yeah, what about you?
I just want to just stick with that for a moment because what I found was really interesting with that is you tried to cope using coping mechanisms
Mm,
when actually we have to let something go.
mm,
And what made you let go was love.
absolutely.
And I think if we think about all our ceremonies that we ever do, whether they're funerals or celebratory ceremonies, we're always around love, aren't we?
Mm,
And love is a bit of an abstract term because it means different things to different people. But I think love, we always know when we feel it
mm,
ourselves, however we define it. And that broke that coping mechanism and made you go through from one state to another state and come out a different person than you went into it. And I think the journey that we traveled during ceremonial times, it can be difficult, it can be
absolutely.
challenging and an emotional roller coaster, but how important are they?
Mm,
Those the ability to get from that. And I think when I've ever worked with ritual, that is one thing I'm really conscious of with my clients, my family, or the bereaved, is that we're on a journey now from one position to a different position. And where are we trying to get to?
mm.
What's the end game of this ceremony? Be it a funeral, be it a wedding, be it a vow renewal, whatever it is, what's the aim for it? It's an interesting.
But I think that's different for everybody. Everybody gets to a different outcome, don't they,
They do.
during that journey? Some people will be reconciled. Some people will feel more at peace. Some people will feel more ready to move on. Some people will feel that a weight has been lifted and they have now permission to go on and live their lives. So we're all on a different path, aren't we? And I
Yeah.
think also this what's very important is a sense of unity and a sense of coming together and a sense of sharing. So it's not having to go through that journey on your own. It's about finding commonalities in the journeys that people are going through around grief, and understanding and support,
Yeah.
and actually saying to people if there's an opportunity to do that, recognizing the journey that people are on.
We often say as celebrants, don't we, that may the love that we had for the deceased, may we use that love to comfort each other and
Absolutely.
support each other. But one of the things also is that emotions are so heightened
They are,
that
yes.
they can go either which way. They can go where we support and love each other and we're there for each other, or they can bring grudges or emotional baggage from previous time, and it can become very heightened and real
You
during a
have to be
ceremony.
prepared for that as a
Yeah,
celebrant, don't you? You have to be prepared that when for a funeral, when you're arranging that, you go and see a family,
yeah.
it's not always the same, and the atmosphere in the room may not necessarily be one that's full of love at that period of time.
Who knows what the
You know,
past is and what they're bringing to the table on that day.
yeah. Have you had any ones that are particularly memorable for you?
I've never had angry, but I've had it where that I felt that there has been two a fraction in the not a fraction. What's the word I'm
Friction.
after? Friction. There's been friction or faction
It is both.
in within the family where they fought over what words go in the eulogy,
Yeah,
and the new wife say has one version and the daughter from the previous marriage had a completely different
that must be
version.
awkward.
That was, but actually I'm not there to sort, as a celebrant, I'm not there to sort out their family problems and their different stories. I'm there to create for my client the best honouring eulogy for the deceased, and that's my aim during it. And I was, through open discussion, able to say, please can you two come together and make a decision of what's to go in here, because I don't want there to be any feelings of animosity when I'm reading these words out. And it all happened fine. Have you ever had experience?
I had experience of a funeral for an alcoholic where there was basically not much love lost between the father and the son, and it is difficult. I don't know if you know anybody who knows people who've had drink problems
Yeah.
or an addiction. Separating the addiction from the person is really difficult. So the funeral was very short, but the sister of the deceased did a eulogy. I read it on her behalf, but it was all about him as a child. So subtle messages of saying, there is love. I love him. I loved him. He was my brother and he was a child once, without actually sermonizing to the people
Yes.
who were there. So it was very beautifully
Just
done.
reminding everybody that that human being who was that lovely boy was still there.
Yeah. And I suppose it's about, as we said, a transition, a journey, unity, and sometimes forgiveness or recognition.
Yeah.
And you know, we don't tell people how to feel. We're all different, but I guess it's about facilitating people's journey so that they can make their own minds up, but actually it makes them stop and think quite
Because we're
often.
dealing with something which is so important, the grief process, and one of part of which, with the Kubler-Ross model anyway, is anger. And sometimes we have to be careful that anger isn't shown to us. Have you ever had that happen?
No. I've had people who could hardly speak to me because they were so full of grief.
Yeah.
And that means you have to be patient because you have to get them to that place by the time the funeral occurs, that you have to have the service. And so you have to really step back and come from a place of understanding and give them that space. But being a celebrant, sometimes it's difficult because you also have to move them on so that
Yes.
they're ready, aren't they? And it's about finding the words and the timing, and the understanding of them and what they're going through, I think is part of the art of being a celebrant versus I know how technically to do a funeral, versus I recognise what's going on here, and I am actually going to go away and think very hard about how I approach them, even how
Yes.
you write an email to them.
Yes.
Can it's
So having a little bit of insight
Yeah.
into and being perceptive about the dynamics within the family
Yeah.
and the best way to smooth that passage from
Absolutely.
one state to get to the other state.
Absolutely.
So talking now a little bit more about celebratory ceremonies, love is obviously, the part of all of those. Have you got some good experiences where that's been really obvious, and do you have a preferred ceremony that you prefer to do?
I don't have a preferred ceremony. I mean, people always ask you when you're marketing yourself as a celebrant, what's your niche? And I always laugh and say there's gravel outside,
Yes.
and it's a big country house. I love all of that. But actually, the first ceremony I ever did, they just wanted me to repeat what the registrar had said, which was like, oh, really? So I gave it. I didn't charge them a full amount. I wish I had, but there you go. But the second one was a couple who were both getting married for the same time, for the second time.
Yeah.
He had 2 girls, she has 2 boys, and they're the same age. And I walked into their house, and it was like 2 beautiful souls had met. I could feel it from the minute that I walked in, the love that they had each other, but the shared passion that they had for their children, their common interests, and I just went away feeling there are 2 people there who are going to make old bones together. And their ceremony was beautiful. They did hand tying. They did it with cords, and they practiced it with their children. So that it was the one where it goes underneath your thumbs. And each of the children bore a different element: earth, fire, water, and air, because those things were, important. It wasn't a pagan kind of ceremony, but that's the things that they liked. So they tied it, and then they just pulled it, and they.
So within that ceremony was a symbolic ritual of bringing 2 parts of the family and making them into one. And it's quite interesting to think about the similarity and differences between ritual and ceremony.
Yes. How would you?
I was just
going to ask me that.
Yeah. Well, because I think that ceremonies are rituals, but I think, for my mind anyway, the difference between symbolic ritual and ceremony being a ritual, I think that's how I define them in my mind. So within the ritual of a ceremony, there might also be a symbolic ritual. And it might be what you were talking about with the hand tying or hand fasting. When we teach celebrants, we teach them all kinds of different things that can be very poignant and be like a metaphor for what's actually going on within the couple or within the family or whatever the subject is. Building something in symbolically, I think, does quite a lot. It says a message to everybody out there. It grabs the attention of everybody who's watching it. Whenever I've done any symbolic rituals, it's like you could hear a pin drop because everyone's going, what's going on? What's this? This is amazing. But it takes the message to a deeper level. So whatever the underlying message of love is, I accept you, I forgive you, we're going to be 2 coming as one. This adopted child is now actually really physically part of this family. Whatever it is that it's designed to do, I think symbolic rituals within the ritual of ceremony, they make celebrancy so magical.
They do.
We do say it's the best job in the world, don't we? We do. And I think the fact that when you're talking to your clients and you're finding out their story, that's when you can sometimes have these little moments of ping, oh, I know what would work here.
Yeah.
Then you tailor it to their stories and you pick up all the clues that they've told you and you make the magic happen for them. That's the beauty for me of ceremonies.
That's how ceremonies have evolved now. And if you think, going back to a transition or a journey, a wedding ceremony does that in lots of different ways, because it's not only about the couple uniting, it could be about a family uniting. Think about it from the point of view of a parent. It's about a recognition that my son or daughter have grown, and I'm giving them away to someone else, and all of that pride and reflection on the journey that they have been through
Like
with
a
their
cutting
children.
of the apron
Yeah,
strings.
cutting of the apron strings. And then we celebrate in lots of different ways now, don't we, in terms of rites of passage that perhaps 30 or 40 years ago we wouldn't have done.
I think even 10 years ago, people didn't really know much about celebrancy and what a celebrant was. The traditional celebrations of weddings, funerals, and christenings, baby namings in our case, were probably the ones that were the most known, even up to 10 years ago. And I think within the last 10 years, society has changed, societal expectations and what they celebrate have changed. The way the law has changed to be more inclusive and more embracing. And I think especially obviously for more minority groups, there's a lot more to celebrate now out there. And we should celebrate. There's always enough to feel miserable about, to celebrate those marks of passage, those rites of passage, those moments in your life that we hold dear and important. As you were saying, the ones that we have now are really quite different. When you think of an adoption ceremony, which I just mentioned, you think of a commitment ceremony where you don't want the legal part, you just want an outward commitment to friends and family about the nature of your relationship. And gender, I mean, gender is a huge issue in 2022 and will continue to be. A naming ceremony which will affirm somebody's gender and new name. How important is that for somebody who has lived a life up to that point feeling not themselves?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's extraordinary. And so I guess being a celebrant gives you an absolutely fantastic opportunity to share in love. And I think when we train people, that's our starting position, isn't it? It's all about love.
It's all about love.
And what's more important than that?
That's it.
That's it.
Wonderful place to finish our talk. What's more important than love?
Oh, thank you, Julie.
Thanks, Max.